All right. And I would like to introduce you to today's host and moderator, Karen O'Brien. She is the Executive Director of the Michigan Recycling Coalition. Karen, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much for hosting today.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Appreciate this. Thank you all for being here with us today. With financial support from EPA Region 5, the Michigan Recycling Coalition and Resource Recycling Systems, or RRS, brought a large group of Region 5 stakeholders together about a year ago to discuss recent advances in recycling in Michigan and in other Region 5 states. And we talked about ways we could work together to rebuild Region 5 collaboration to develop regional recycled material markets and grow the recycled or the circular economy in Michigan and the region, because we know that we can achieve more by working together. So in that meeting, we discussed briefly a tool that was created by RRS for Region 4. We're calling kind of this toolkit, you know, the Making the Case toolkit. With Region 5 funding, this tool has now been updated to meet Region 5 needs with Region 5 data, and it has also been enhanced to include organics management. And in this webinar, you will learn more about that tool and a program that we call Making the Case for Recycling. So before we get too far into the discussion about what this kind of toolkit is, let's look at our agenda for today. So, you know, we're really going to introduce this. Why do we need, you know, a toolkit to make the case for recycling? We'll talk a little bit about that. Marty Seaman will talk about what happened in Region 4, why they decided to develop this toolkit, and introduce the first of the tools here. Holly Hollowell will introduce the Integrated Solid Waste Management Tool. It's an Excel-based worksheet, so you'll get a deep dive into what that is about. We'll break out into discussion groups to really explore a little bit more deeply what the value of this tool is for your state, in your community, maybe what we can do in the region together. We'll come back together to debrief about that, and then we'll talk about, you know, next steps for using this tool and what we have planned to train about this tool. Next slide. So we have this session today planned where we are providing kind of all the background that we just talked about. We also have a second session planned for June 16th. You will receive information about that session shortly following this particular session, where we will do something very similar, talk a little bit more about the tool, provide some examples about how this tool has been used and the value that it has brought to planning efforts moving forward. And then ultimately this culminates in a more in-depth workshop and training about how this tool can be manipulated and used in communities across your state. And that's our eventual goal here, is that everybody has advanced knowledge of this tool and can share and use this tool in their own communities across regions to really understand the provision of integrated solid waste management services and begin to make well-informed choices about how those services are provided. Next slide. So, as I believe you all know, Michigan secured funding back in 2018, and since early 2019, we've been funding programs. One of those programs that has been funded by the state of Michigan is called Next Cycle Michigan. Next Cycle is designed to incubate and accelerate the growth of new programs and the enhancement of existing programs to fill gaps and meet identified needs in Michigan. But what we're finding in that process is there's a significant knowledge gap. Program managers, economic developers, especially local officials, are not always well versed in recycling and don't always have a handle on the full cost accounting implications of not only existing integrated solid waste management programs, but development or enhancement of new programs. But we think these tools can help you and them make the case to locals to advance all of this programming. So whether we're talking about answering questions about difficult programs, whether we're talking about trying to establish new programs, justify capital investments in transfer stations or infrastructure, we need to be able to meet them where they are, to analyze programs with them, and to provide the financial information that they really need to feel like they've got command of the services that we're talking about and the investments that they're talking about. So we hope that these are the right tools to help you analyze and justify capital investment and service provision overall. So moving on from there, I'd like to introduce Marty Seaman, who's Principal and Executive Vice President with RRS, because he will share history of work in Region 4 and then a little bit about the full cost accounting aspect of this program. Marty?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. We're talking a lot today about one of two objectives of this grant, which is to really have people understand and adopt this tool, and then also to figure out a way that we can all collaborate around economic development. And this is going to be a really great way for us to explore that through through the calendar that Karen has laid out. So thanks again. I want to talk about how this tool and set of tools together was developed, because I think there's a lot of insights there, and the whole premise of the project really is that this is on point for Region 5, and so it's worth understanding that, because as we go through, we're gonna I'll take exception to the one thing Karen said, is that this project is being updated, and that is we really need the feedback from Region 5 now that we've taken some of these elements and made them more available, but we really need your feedback in helping us to perfect those. But in terms of the story, we're really going to try to, in 3 meetings, get through what we did in 3 years in Region 4. But it's worth knowing that these tools were developed through a really strongly facilitated process, that there was heavy support convened by the region, supported by CERDIC, the local economic development agency, and also through EPA headquarters. And during that time, a lot of what, essentially everything under the sun was looked at. What, should we spend $500,000 and develop a very dynamic economic development tool? Should we create a roadmap? Should we, all of these discussions around what's the appropriate role for the region to take? What's the appropriate role for the state to take? And through a facilitated process, what kept coming up is that the biggest challenge we have is that there's a whole cohort of recyclers out there who need to be able to defend and to advocate and make the business case for their recycling programs. And the states, didn't necessarily have that capability. The feds didn't necessarily, but they knew they needed to get help to those local communities, because as we all know, that's when you actually develop the infrastructure. And the charge was really very simple. It was we have a disposal policy currently, and we're adopting integrated solid waste management, and how do we convert from one to the other? And so again, there was a lot of things that weren't looked at. We weren't trying to help best in class programs. In fact, most of the tools, as you'll see, are really devoted to small up to medium-sized communities. And as we developed it, we came up with some places that we would have liked to develop tools, but we didn't. Organics, it felt like that was too early at that time. Multifamily recycling, commercial recycling, in some ways, as a component that should and could be looked at. And so there was some other elements that we've identified as being useful. But at the end of the day, again, we're back to the premise of this kind of on the ground training to help people understand, really, so they can advocate to make the business case is what came out of that. And really two tools came out of it at that time, which was this kind of benchmark budgeting that we're going to talk about in just a second, as well as this kind of benchmark analyticals that Holly's going to talk about, but really designed to have people develop really good skills around just being financially literate and able to advocate for their programs, and then being able to understand their place within that through the analytics. So why don't you go to the next slide? And so then the final piece of that, besides this kind of how do we look about funding, how do we look at that, how do we look at our place and run some numbers to see what makes sense for us as an investment for the community, is the final piece of that three-legged stool was the actual make the case training and the additional insights that went into, okay, we're really good at understanding the program and we can technically design it, but we have to get buy-in at some point. And so making the case is about actually getting all the way to how do I fund this? How do I make sure I'm addressing all elements of the supply chain? And in doing that, how can I make sure I develop a really robust recycling, whether I'm a big community or a medium-sized community? And so that was kind of the intention, and that's how we developed these tools in total. Now, specific to, so go ahead, next slide. So specific to the funding and accounting tool, this is one of those ones where if you look on the EPA website, I bet you there's 5 of these. There's multiple ways for people to say, here's a help with you to do your budgeting. And we really resisted through this process a lot of push to kind of come up with a silver bullet budget that people could put in all their numbers and take it to council and get their stuff approved or get their grant approved. And we really pushed back at that because we recognize how much this is important to be done in a really fiscally diligent way with real numbers, on the ground numbers locally, et cetera. But what this does provide is a really wonderful way to look at all elements of programming. And so when you're in a situation, I know many of you have been there, where you have communities talking about, we're going to have a bake sale for our recycling truck, and they have a fully funded solid waste program and a fully funded collection program, and there's something that's really disconnected here. We're not making the bridge to a fully integrated solid waste management system. How do we make that happen? And this is really, again, to try to find a way to really explain how that can be done and how you can engage with the city manager and the committees and other folks to actually achieve some kind of integration. Go ahead, next slide. And so again, this, like I said, it identifies a number of things that end up being, really important. Costs and revenues. It allows you to look at things over multiple years so you can make investments. You can look at any of these bullets and understand how you have to be able to talk about cost. When you can talk about expanded programs and you can point to specific slides and say, here's where we're going to fund this, here's where we're addressing this. And you'll also have other opportunities to say, here's where sales or revenues come in, here's where outside investments come in, here's where grant funding comes in. It allows you to create a much better picture for what you're trying to invest in, but especially prepares you to be able to make the business case for a recycling program. Go ahead, next slide. So even though it's not a static system, it's not a live budget spreadsheet that you can put your numbers in, what it does do is that, like I said, it has a series of ready-to-use spreadsheets that identify these. It's got a lot of information that goes behind those line items to help you to say, boy, am I really utilizing all the funding mechanisms available to me? Am I getting all the benefits that I might be providing to the city and making sure I'm getting revenue for that so I can continue to provide those services? So it's really about training around a way to look at how you can be aggressive about making sure that recycling is a part of your system. And so I think that's really kind of what the handbook does. And then again, taking these kind of this financial literacy, the other issue that we really addressed through Region 4 was, especially whether it was state-run grant programs, just or other investments, is there is a lot of different feelings about, well, am I a hub or am I a spoke, or I want a program, but I want to do the very most expensive things right out the gate. And so there was a lot of discussion about what's real and what's fundable. And that's the directional tool that we came up with as a way to kind of say, where do I fit? And if I am going to make certain investments, what does that mean for me in terms of capital or some other pieces? And again, between the two of those pieces, I felt like that gave especially practitioners, folks like yourself, and regional coordinators, folks that have to be really the frontline advocates for recycling, would be able to have that financial literacy and that kind of perspective of where they fit in the marketplace to be able to really advocate for making the business case. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll go to the second part. We're really happy to have Holly Hallowell, who's a consulting engineer, as you can see. I'm really proud of this spreadsheet because it's really quite simple and it's really quite elegant and it's really quite useful. And I think that was found to be that way in Region 4. And I know we've taken many parts of that, added the compost, and have done that. But Holly has been very involved with our supply chain efforts in terms of evaluating that, which also means she's been at many waste sorts, which is a lot of fun. Recently involved in a MRF retrofit down in Region 4 in Kentucky, but been with us for 3 years. She's a biosystems graduate of MSU, and in case you folks haven't had a chance to meet her, I really wanted to make sure that you did. Holly, thank you.
Next slide, please. So this model is designed for local governments as a directional tool for comparing various scenarios for recycling traditional materials such as, paper, glass, metal, plastics. And the new addition is considering, processing organic materials such as yard waste or food waste. And it doesn't provide specific costs, of course, because there are too many unique things for each community, but it can give you an idea of how much more your community might be able to recycle based on the program that they choose, as well as, which programs are more expensive than other ones. Next slide. So this is a quick look at the inputs that are required to use the tool. There are 15 questions that must be answered. Only a few of them you absolutely have to select a specific answer for. The rest have default options, so you're still able to get a rough idea, even if you don't know, the exact value. And we're going to go over the inputs in more detail when I do a walkthrough a few slides later. Next slide, please. So this is the first part of the model. It looks at the cost for collection of material. And you can see that there are 7 different options for the traditional recyclables part of this model. And again, the model shows you only directionally which of these programs might be more expensive than the other, and how many staff might be required for, let's say, dual stream versus single stream. But there are different options available based on what you think would work best for your community. Next slide. And then here's a look at the organics. So here we consider 2 different types of compost systems. We have aerated static pile, and we also have windrow systems. And since some communities may only accept yard waste, we considered what's a scenario for only collecting yard waste, and then what would it look like if we also included food waste. Next slide, please. And so in addition to collection costs, this model presents a directional analysis of whether your community would work best as a hub or whether they'd work best as a spoke. So, should your community direct haul material to a facility that already exists, that's maybe 20 miles away from where you are, or is there enough material in your community that it makes sense to build a transfer station? It makes sense to build a MRF, process the material there, makes sense to process the organic material on site as well. Yes, next slide. So now I'm going to do a quick walkthrough. I'm going to share my screen. Just one second. So I don't think that this, so can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I don't think this model is available for users yet, but there are 4 main tabs that you need to look at. The first one, instructions. It goes through how you enter the inputs. Everything is there that you need, but let's just go through the inputs here. So I picked Ann Arbor, for example. You select, you type this in, you type in your community, and then there's a drop down. So there's several drop down options here, and you select which state you're in. you put how many households you have in your community. And this is any household that would be serviced by a roll cart. So it's not just single family, but it can be some condos if they are serviced by a roll cart. And then, what kind of participation do you think you would get for your recycling program? Again, there are several different options, and you can see here that there's sort of a default option if you don't have a good idea of what that might be. And, what's your community type? Is it really rural? Are the houses really spaced out? Or is it more urban? Whether or not you want glass in the stream, and then how much do you think people would put in their cart? So if they are participating, how full would their cart be of recyclables each week or every other week? And there also is the option to for landfill tip fee. If you don't know, you can say, I don't know, put the model will use the default, or right here, you can enter a specific value if you do know that information. Same thing for tip fee for recyclables. If you know a specific value, you can put it there. Next question asks for, how far is it from your municipality to a transfer station MRF? Again, there are different options available. And these questions down here are specific to the organics part of this model. And the main two tabs that are most interesting are the results tab. The first one discusses the collection costs. So here we have all of the options laid out for you. Recycling, we do have a drop-off program that is considered. Organics, that is not part of this model. And then you can see that we have dual stream options as well as changes in frequency of pickup. So for example, here we have the tons of recyclables that you would expect to get each year. And you can see that with a drop-off program, you get about 4,000 tons per year. But if you did single stream with carts, weekly collection, you get about 4 times that. And it has it broken out per household as well. And then you have all the different costs. We have the annual total cost, annual cost that only considers operations and maintenance. And then we have the cost broken up by household per year, cost per ton, and then total capital costs. So you can see that with a drop-off program, you invest this much, but if you invested several million more for a single stream program, this is how much it'd be for the added tons. And we also have information about the number of vehicles that it would take. And this comes from the type of area that you live in. Of course, rural, you have to have, it's gonna be more expensive to collect from houses that are spaced out more. And there may be more staff required for a dual stream collection versus single stream. So that could be something that your community might really want to consider. And we also have the information, of course, for the organics part. And there's more information down below if you have a question about it once you get your hands on the model, if it doesn't make sense. And then the other results tab is for the hub and spoke. So this one's laid out a little bit differently. There is a drop-down option here where if you want to look at, let's say, single stream with carts, weekly collection, you have to select it and then you can see it. And so here it'll show you that the cost per ton for direct haul is $83, but to build a transfer station, it's $127. Let's say we want to compare this single stream with carts weekly collection to dual stream with carts weekly collection. You can see how the cost changes just a little bit. So this gives you this directional insight to which one of these programs is more expensive, and how does it change direct haul cost for dual stream versus single stream. And same thing with the organics part here. We have the different options. Let's say your community only wants to deal with yard waste. They don't want to deal with food waste. It's too messy. You don't think you'll have high participation in that scenario. And let's say windrow type system fits better for the type of management that you want. You'd select that, and then you can see how much it would cost for capital cost here to build this windrow system. And the reason it says not applicable here is because this is for arid static pile. And right now we have selected the windrow system. And again, there is more information down below about some assumptions that are made, some specifics about this data presented here. And that's about it. I'm going to pass it back to Marty. He's going to talk about all the necessary requirements of a successful recovery program and the training opportunities that are available. And I need to stop sharing my screen.
There you go. Thank you, Holly. And good questions I see coming up in the chat. As Melissa said, we'll have a chance to answer some of those later and to look under the hood a little bit. So we'll look forward to doing that. The reason I wanted to come to this slide next is because really this is the underpinning of the way we responded to our request from EPA to develop a strategy of how do you convert to integrated solid waste management. And it really came down to, you just have to systematically implement best practices around recovery. And we know that, and this feeds directly into the kind of financial and other arguments you're making. This is not crazy stuff. This is not fringe. This is not, shouldn't be something that's treated outside. It's something that needs to be an integrated part of your system. And so, but we recognize in developing that infrastructure and making sure it performs, there are a number of key stakeholders, a number of key kind of technical components that are a part of that collection, processing, and markets, education, but also the policies, whether they're federal down to local, that support and supportive of those programs, and the significant role that public and private funding and other types of collaboration play. And this is proven. Successful programs share all of these elements, some to a greater or lesser degree, but that's just a component of what they do. And so it really then led very nicely then to how do you wrap those very successful, how do you make the business case tools into how do we actually just make the case for recycling? How do we develop a cohort of people who can talk intelligently, financially responsibly about doing due diligence and saying we should need to find a way to develop these programs and integrate them. And so next slide, please. And so really, I think what's different about make the case and something that came out strongly in our after work with EPA and the NRC on market development is that it's more than just the recycling folks or more than just the solid waste folks that are going to be involved in any approvals of these programs, any investments in these programs. And that's because costs, benefits, and impacts go all over the community. And as we saw in that previous slide, but we really tried to be able to support through the first two components, the ability to talk about those, to have strong organizational methods in place, have strong funding mechanisms and policy supports, but you also have to address the community and business considerations and the political engagement that goes into it. You don't have policy without the policymakers saying yes. You don't have funding without various entities investing into your programs that are agreeing to fee setting and other pieces. And so it's really how do you bring all those pieces together? So at a really high functioning level, you can create a group of advocates. And we used to talk about, let's have 300 people throughout the region, in Region 4, who can stand up in any setting and articulate why it makes sense to have strong recycling as a part of your community programs. So those are the elements that we've got coming up and that we hope to deliver again in the fall in the upcoming event. But really, that's the third leg of that stool that represents those training components. I think that leads us to the Q&A.
That's great. Thank you, Marty and Holly, for your really great explanation. I think that was helpful to all of us. We've got at least 4 questions from the chat, or 3 questions from the chat and 1 of my own. So, Holly, can you help us understand what the default value for the landfill tip fees are?
Yeah, so this is based off of data that RRS has accumulated, and it varies by state. So we have the average landfill tip fee for your state. So that's why it matters when you enter in a drop-down list, which state are you in?
That's great. So when we said we're updating information with Region 5 data, this is one of those data points we're talking about. Can you say anything else about the other data points that are specific to Region 5?
The other things that are specific to the region would be the average persons per household. That can vary by state. So that is another specific thing that is used.
That's great.
And then of course, other things that have been updated are the costs for staff and equipment and all of those things, because of course that's changed a lot over the past few years.
It certainly has. Okay, great. How do you get households for a drop-off program?
Are you asking how do we know how many households can be serviced for one drop-off?
That's a good question, but I would guess that is part of the question, yes.
So we have some assumptions that are built into this model based on our best experience, with previous work. So I can't find what that number is exactly, but there is a number that we use that we assume that this is how many households we could reach per drop-off program, or per site, per drop-off site. And so that's how many sites we would need in that program.
And then if I were to ask that question a different way, do you recommend people insert just the households of the community into the model to get the drop-off information that they might need?
The households that they're supposed to enter in the inputs tab are ones that are serviced currently by a roll cart for their trash. So it's not meant for multifamily that lives in apartments where their trash is collected in a dumpster. This is just if they're serviced by a roll cart.
Gotcha. That's helpful. Matt
Kate,
Kittle is.
if I could also, think about that in terms of what you're really putting in any scenario is who you're actually hoping to serve. So if you have a drop off and you're servicing 3 counties and there's that many households, if that matches the parameters, as Holly said, because there are kind of, service parameters that are in place to be able to do that. But that's really the key thing, is putting that in, because also when people look to collaborate and say, well, the town and the township and the county really should all go together on this drop off. Now you can put those numbers in and the model will still work, right? It'll still work because, well, if we want to service a region, what does that do for our capital budget? What does that do for that? So that's, again, that point of directionally, where do we fit? And Holly, you might answer, I know in the Region 4 model, should we do a drop off or a super drop off? We had some different perturbations there. That may be something that we develop here because it's, again, so important. We did the combos for the organics this time, but that might be a separate solution, is to try to develop that further.
And Holly, do you see Matt's clarification? He's actually wondering, pounds per household for drop-off situation.
So that information, I don't know off the top of my head. Just for a little bit of background, I worked mostly on the organic side of this model. Chris King is another staff member at RS. He worked more so on the traditional recyclables part of this. And so I'm not exactly sure where that value comes from. I do know that the pounds per household for non-drop-off, that I'm pretty sure that came from the Recycling Partnership, one of their reports that they published.
Appreciate that. That helps. Were education and engagement considered as a part of the programming costs in the model, or is that something separate?
Again, I'm not exactly sure if that is included.
Okay.
I can't say for sure.
Okay, that's fine. And so this is, do you account for a specific hauler going out of their way to use their own transfer station, landfill, or MRF, or are you really calculating it based on what's closest? Or not really calculating it that way at all?
We assume that it all happens the same way. So if there is a hauler, it's going to be a single hauler contracted with the municipality. It's not multiple haulers. And if they are using that transfer station, the model will assume that they're using that transfer station every single time they make a pickup. There's not any way to say that for, half of the places that they do a pickup, they do take it to, whatever transfer station that they do have.
And Karen, this is where I have to raise the caveat again, which is to say, this is not the financial tools that you're going to build your business case. This is truly a directional tool that's going to say, hey, we think this gets you close. Now, part of the discussion might be, can we take deeper state level data? Can we take more regionalized data and get more precise with it? Yeah, we can, but it's always going to be on really the business development at that point to go, we're going to actually make a case for this. And again, this is why we paired this with the budget component, which has very specific places to say, here's where education gets paid for, and here's the benefits you get. Here's how you can contribute to a drop-off station and have that benefit more than just the single family residents that you serve through dual stream or single stream, right? And so that's why they really need to be considered in whole, but let's not put too much of a load on this. I mean, at the time, the EPA rejected about a $450,000 proposal to build something closer, to this. And it's like, no, this is a reasonable approach. And can you ever make that good enough? It's always better to do the work yourself and to have your region engage and invest in itself, right? And that's what we hope to facilitate, to give people the tools to do that.
Great, good clarification. Can you describe dual stream with carts? Is that assuming 2 carts per household, one for containers, one for paper, or is that the household would use 1 cart and only put 1 part of the stream in it each week?
So that is 2 bins, and then the collection occurs every other week for both of those bins at the same time.
Okay, great. Can waste management companies be competitive to provide services that compare with the integrated solid waste management tool? It speaks to your point, Marty, I think, about this being a directional tool.
Yeah, they're going to be a line item somewhere in there. And in fact, the services they offer and the price they offer is going to be a part of that decision to say, wow, all I can get is this and it costs this much. Maybe I want to look at other approaches to develop other services, whether it's a drop off or a bidding process or other ways that hey, we need to partner on a facility so we can all share it. So it leads to those kinds of practical things that actually develop real infrastructure. So
that's great. That's great. So that's all the questions that we have at this time. I believe now we're going into our breakout discussion. Melissa, I believe you are going to be pulling the trigger.
I am. And you'll notice there are a few questions up on the screen. And this is just to give everyone a prompt. I'm going to break you into 2 different rooms. We've pre-divided you as a group. Karen is going to lead one of those rooms and Marty is going to lead the other room. They're going to facilitate the discussion. And we'd like to hear from you. We want your feedback. You got a little taste of the tools today. And so is there info beyond what has been shown that would be useful? Is it helpful to have capital and operating costs separated in the tool? And how do you see these tools being used in your state? Each state is slightly different in how things are happening and running. So you've now gotten a taste. How do you think this can be utilized? We want to hear from you about these things. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remind Isabel and Karen, once you get into the breakout rooms, please select record to local so we can make sure that we're capturing all of this great information. I am going to hit the breakout room button here shortly, and you are all going to be pushed into different rooms. If for some reason you do not get pushed into a room or you fall out of a room, I will be here in the main room to help you get back into where you need to be. I think Karen and Isabel, let's do about 15 minutes of discussion, and I might send a little message just to check in and see if you guys need a few extra minutes to finish up or if that's going to be fine. and we'll go from there. I'm going to hit breakout rooms, and I'm going to open them, and you will all be transferred in. Okay, you've been invited to join, so go ahead and click the button to join, and you'll pop over to your breakout room.
That's great. Thanks. Well, we had some good discussion in our room. And I'm sure Marty was going to share what they've learned in their rooms. But, I'll just share that, we had some discussion around the way that each state has or is very different. I mean, there's really different assumptions that need to be made for each state. And I believe this model includes some of those assumptions, but our group went a little bit deeper, and we took some notes to check on some of those assumptions. We also talked about the fact that this model could be even more finely adapted to each state. If the state is willing to put some funding into expanding this model or enhancing this model for state specific kind of purposes, to make it easier, to make those underlying assumptions more clear and numerous, that can be available there as well. Tracy Pernage really brought up an interesting question is, when are we going to move on from just seasonal organics collection? When can we start talking about how that gets provided in a more year-round kind of way, because that is, food waste is generated year-round, but we've got a little ways to go to get there. If anybody wants to pipe up and add anything from our conversation, you're welcome to do that. Steve, do you have anything that you want to add from that discussion?
I just think we need to go through the instructions, make sure that, if there are things that are, pretty divergent for a particular state, that we include those in the instructions, as people are working through this. Wisconsin with their required material list is the one that came up. And, that's one that we, if you're in Wisconsin, you're planning a program, you really can't take glass out. And we just need to make that clear in some of the instructions there. So it limits the options.
Karen, can we talk like just for 30 more seconds about the year-round organics potential?
Sure.
I guess I feel like, at least in Michigan, we don't have a lot of that happening, but we do have some of it. And as as part of our recycling infrastructure grants, we are funding some of that either as, permanent programs or as pilot programs. So I guess in my thinking, I feel like if it's not something that we see like in this tool, that I guess it's just an opportunity to be a little bit more forward thinking, right? Yeah. And to see that as an opportunity when communities are looking at and using this tool, that they see that as like, oh, that's the next step for us, right?
Yes. Yes.
So that's all. So.
Yep, agreed. We do want to forge the path for sure.
Right.
For sure.
Yep.
Well, Karen, if I could, fine tuning that compost piece is one that organics one is one that I think is going to require that, because again, remembering who the client is. I'll say one of my debriefs was great, is that all of my state members said, we can't do this. We need to deliver this to the locals. And I was like, right, that's exactly what Region 4 said, is that we need to really get this, into the local levels. The other modules that they were looking at, again, back to that small city and maybe the multifamily or ones that have been identified previously. And when we look at that clientele, that's not the big cities, not the high performers. It's all those folks who have no programs at all, who are likely to start with a drop off or curbside, not with a full scale organics program, et cetera. So the organics one, I think is new, it's different. And to your point, Tracy, what's going to be the highest utility around that one. And I think that's open to where that needs to go. Maybe that needs to be less focused on small communities and more focused on, that cadre of people who are likely to want to adapt it. And I think we're very open, to all those pieces. The other piece I'll just, again, concur, Karen, is this: how do we localize it? And how do we, recognize that that's there? I think for the base model, we've done that in terms of being statewide, but you identified the data components that can also be adjusted. But part of the Region 4 process was, boy, there's a lot of work that can be done state by state to support the budget component, which says, what are my funding mechanisms? I use a DPW district. I have they have these different districts. I have a different thing. I have a plan in Wisconsin. And so there's a lot of elements that it's maybe not the tool that should not be overused, right? It's directional, et cetera. It's not it, but there's other ways to make sure that when we're training folks up on how to be financially, competent and really arguing for the programs, make sure they know what their state, workarounds are, what their state grant programs are, et cetera. So there's places to improve it in other areas too that might answer the same question in terms of its utility. I just really encourage people to give us any feedback like that, Karen, but I will say we should pretty much assume that we are going to have a technical session. I think there's enough people who want to just, hey, Holly, you're going to spend an hour, we're going to walk through it and do that. And so I don't know that we need to do that with this whole group, but certainly we could get a group that's self-selected and make sure that we offer that to folks, sooner than later. And if the compost discussion is a part of that, that's probably okay too.
Marty, do you want to talk?
I was just going to say, would it be all right if Holly just walks through that drop down to show what the variations in the organics programs are? That, I think that was the bulk of the questions in our group is what are the options that are being considered?
So the options that are considered are the type of compost technology, whether it's windrow or aerated static pile, and then whether or not you're processing yard waste only or yard waste as well as food waste. Those are pretty much the only options. Everything else is set with the collection being seasonal 8 months out of the year. Are there more options that you're thinking would be useful?
Well, the question was, so with food waste, obviously you switch to a 12-month calendar instead of an 8-month calendar, and your volumes just align to those months.
So it's still seasonal.
Okay.
It's still
so
seasonal, even if it is food waste included.
Okay, gotcha.
Right, we'll have to talk about that in the future as we work together as a team. Marty, did you have any findings or debrief from the work in your group? What was your discussion about?
I really, like I said, I really think it really just mimicked a lot of what you had to say. The first feedback was, this is really great. It's really on point. That's a lot of our issues. How do we get the locals to use it? Right. And should we beef some of those up? This notion of, I really believe this will be true, is that the small city university multifamily, that's going to be a question for a lot of people. And I think will really improve the utility of the tool altogether. And it's got that for a lot of regions that are maybe not super rural like the South is, but are pretty rural, but have small cities. So that came up. And then again, there's these notions about we're all local. How do we beef up the understanding, maybe not just with the tool, but also with those other understandings that are available through the budget and all that. And then I think the other piece that we talked about a little bit was, very explicit. This is SROs, the recycling organizations is the state. This is economic development entities. This is privates, and that when you're thinking about who to invite, who to include, how to deliver this, through your state, make sure you're including all those folks and sharing that information back with us. So I think that's the kind of the quick summation. And again, I'd offer anyone else in our group to speak up. We heard from Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois.
That's great. I think we're getting really close to kind of wrapping this session up. We're going to give you back some time today. So, you know, we're still kind of, you know, developing these ideas, or how we're going to bring more people into the fold over the next, you know, couple months. But our intention is to hold another session very much like this, where we talk a little bit more, get a little bit further down the road in some of the questions that you all brought up. But what we really need is for you all to, you know, identify other kind of recycling leaders in your state, not just state level leaders, but local and regional leaders that really understand and could easily see the value of this tool, to come to the session in June to learn about this tool, so that they can also attract people to the training that we're planning in September. So we really want to build the momentum for this training in September, where we're ready to hand off this tool for people to actually use and apply. Part of that training is going to be like, you know, maybe about how you're making a presentation, at least providing examples as to how others have done that. So what I encourage you to do, a couple of things I encourage you to do is, once you get those invitations from us, you'll probably get an invite to register for the June. Please share that with those people you think may be helpful. And if and then I also encourage you to speak with your state level leaders to explore ways that your state can support the dissemination and use of this tool. If there's a value in you using this tool or clarifying this tool, making it more specific to your state, that's something that you can certainly talk about with RRS, but how can you use this in your state? In Michigan, you know, we have a unique relationship with our state agency, the Michigan Recycling Coalition. We are the state recycling organization. We have unique relationship with all of these people, and part of the ways I intend to use it is engaging people on the ground and introducing this tool to them specifically, maybe even walking through this tool with whatever numbers and information they have, to help them figure out where they sit in this logistical system of service provision, and help them find their way using this tool. So we hope that you'll join us in June and again in September for the big system. And I guess I'll ask Marty if he's got anything to add before we let you all go. And thank you for being here today.
I think I'm great. I think
great.
it was good to see everybody. And I would just add that we'll be reaching out in terms of some technical feedback, and it might be a different group that you think of, because we want all your techie people that, you know your data, know your spreadsheets, and want to talk to our people who know the same. But that'll be part of the follow-up. But thanks again to everyone, and really great participation in my group, at least. So I thank you for that as well.
Thank you. Thursday, tomorrow is Friday.
Good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.